The latest potential reminder, although it has flashbacks from 110,000 years ago, is a movie called Moonfall. Now, Moonfall is an upcoming science fiction action disaster thriller film, and it's scheduled to be released theatrically on February 4th, 2022 by Lionsgate. And a mysterious force knocks the moon from its orbit around Earth and sends it hurtling on a collision course with life as we know it. And with mere weeks before impact and the world on the brink of annihilation, NASA executive and former astronaut Jo Fowler, played by Halle Berry, is convinced she has the key to saving us all. But only one astronaut from her past, Brian Harper, played by Patrick Wilson, and conspiracy theorist Casey Houseman, played by John Bradley, believe her. And these unlikely heroes will mount an impossible last-ditch mission into space, leaving behind everyone they love, only to find out that our moon is not what we think it is. More disclosure. Flashback created traumas for those who were here 110,000 years ago, when another moon fell on the planet. Pyramids are being found by archaeologists on the Kola Peninsula, which prove that the existence of an ancient civilization on the territory of Russia. Oops. And currently, archaeological excavations near the pyramids, which according to preliminary estimates are at least 2 times older than the Egyptian ones, which means they're at least 50,000 years old, and have been resumed on the Kola Peninsula. And scientists who made an expedition to these places believe that the Kola Peninsula, spelled Kola, may be the ancestral home of the most ancient civilization on Earth. And the weighty argument for this hypothesis is the pyramids discovered by scientists and huge stone slabs were created 9,000 to 40,000 years ago. Keep going, because the pyramids were around 25, 26, and if double the other pyramids, the Egyptian pyramids, then it's 50,000 plus. Now, what is interesting is all the pyramids in Russia are positioned in the direction of east-west. And it also turned out that the pyramids were rebuilt 3 times by ancient people, and each time increasing them in height. Now, Kola is the far northwest of Russia and is located on the edge of the aptly named White Sea. The human body, it is often said to rest at a healthy internal temperature of 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And this average was established 200 years ago in France. And yet in the meantime, it seems our normal physiology has changed ever so slightly. And early last year, researchers in the United States combed Civil War veteran records and national health surveys and found that temperatures amongst men born at the turn of the century were 0.59 degrees Celsius cooler, 2.5 Fahrenheit, than those men born around 200 years earlier. And women, on the other hand, had seen a 0.32 degrees Celsius decline since the 1890s. Now, at the time, the authors suggest it might have something to do with inflammation due to disease, which is closely tied to body temperature. But the rise of modern medicine we've seen a decline in chronic infections, and maybe the authors suggested this has chilled us out, so to speak. But later in 2020, another group of researchers found an eerily similar reduction in body temperature among a relatively remote indigenous tribe in Bolivia, where infections have remained widespread and medical care minimal despite some modern changes. And the reasons for the recent decline in body temperature clearly had to go beyond improved hygiene, cleaner water, or improved medical care, and some researchers at Harvard are now investigating another explanation: a decline in physical activity. And they said when a person exercises regularly, it often coincides with an increase in their metabolism, and this in turn can raise their body's resting temperature for hours or even up to a day, which means falling body temperature measurements might indicate falling physical activity. And he said, unfortunately, the methods we have for measuring physical activity today weren't around 200 years ago, so we can't really compare how we move now to how we moved then. And he said, what could be possible, however, is to use historical body temperature data as a thermometer to gauge physical activity before we started keeping track of these things. Coming soon, people climate change. People lowering their body temperatures is causing global warming. You can just see the headline. It's an interesting piece, and I'm not sure what is causing it. And maybe like warming and cooling cycles of the Earth, sunspot cycles and jet stream patterns, there is an ebb and flow occurring to life on the planet. Or it could be something simple like, we have better clothes to keep warm now, and so our body has adjusted to that fact. Did they think of that? Probably not. Too simple, you see. In the 20th century, it was said to be the century of big ideas, and there was a plot to re-engineer a whole continent. But geography was not the only thing people believed they could conquer with technology, and science, it said, could be used to engineer new and better humans. Now, people often think this is a relatively new science, based in the last 3 to 4 decades with Dolly the sheep and all that shit. Well, this piece shatters that illusion, as it was going on in the first decade of the 1900s. And this was the premise behind eugenics, a pseudoscience that began in the 19th century and reached its horrifying apex with the Nazi atrocities of World War II. So the article said. No, it never. The eugenics program was running in this country, America, 40 years or more prior. In fact, the US eugenics program, being ran on largely the white slavery groups at the time, was so successful it was then used as a blueprint in Germany. I think it was From Russia with Love 5 that covered that. But it was said that this methodology of engineering different humans was too slow for Joseph Stalin, who was the dictator of the Bolshevik Soviet Union and was no stranger to megalomania and villainy. And legend has it that Stalin himself ordered the creation of a race of ape-human hybrids, super soldiers, to rebuild his army in the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution, of which he was a part of. And he was a part of that along with Lenin and others, as we have highlighted again in From Russia with Love. But is there any truth to this? Well, Ilya Ivanov is known as the Red Frankenstein. Now the term red, like the Red Army, is nothing to do with Russia or Russians, I might add. And this strange tale begins with the esteemed Russian scientist Ivanov, and he was famed for his work of artificial insemination in horses. And he used his pioneering techniques to produce hybrids of various other animals, including a zebra-donkey hybrid called a Zedonk. And as early as 1910, Ivanov speculated as to whether it was possible for apes and humans to produce hybrid offspring. And in 1926, years after the revolution, Ivanov got his chance to test his hypothesis. And the Soviet government gave him the equivalent of $10,000 with which to do so. But he was to work with the Institut Pasteur in France, Louis Pasteur. We exposed him in From Russia with Love as being a fake also. And to utilise their facilities in French Guinea. And when he arrived in Africa, though, he found that the facilities were in a shambles. And the only chimps there were juveniles who hadn't yet reached sexual maturity. But later in the year, he was able to get his hands on 3 sexually mature chimps, which he artificially inseminated with human sperm. However, when the chimps failed to conceive, Ivanov decided to take a different and more horrific approach. And he hit on a plan to artificially inseminate human females with chimp sperm. And he wanted to use subjects from a local hospital and to inseminate them without their consent. Hospitals. And he proposed this plan to doctors at the hospital, but the governor of French Guinea stepped in and put the brakes on the whole thing. So probably it went underground, as most things do. Now, Ivanov's expedition wasn't a complete failure, though. He managed to secure 20 apes to establish a Soviet ape nursery, and unfortunately all but 4 of them died before they arrived in the subtropical republic of Abkhazia. Never heard of that place before. Abkhazia. And once Ivanov established the nursery, he set out to find female volunteers to undergo artificial insemination. And he managed to find 5 willing women. But the apes he managed to bring to the nursery all died before he could perform his experiment. And by 1930, the ever-shifting political winds of the Soviet Union had changed. He found 5 willing women. Seriously. This is all very Squid Game, is it not? Because I presume it involved making money again. And it seems some people will do absolutely anything for it at this point. Now, before positive eugenics was in vogue amongst the Soviet elites, by selectively breeding the best citizens, the Soviet Union could cultivate a hard-working, communal-minded population. That is not correct. They had killed all their best citizens in a total bloodbath. And so that's a pile of nonsense for a start. The people of Russia were working in a communal-minded population long before the Bolsheviks turned up. But it amazes me how little the world knows about the truth of the atrocities that took place in Russia 100 or so years ago. And what it reveals is Russia is still being ran by the same psychopaths as back then, as the rest of the world is still oblivious to the death of that country and its peoples. You know, why isn't the latter-day alt media's global world saviour man, Mr. Putin, not saying anything? Or RT News? Why aren't they reporting the truth of what happened to the Russians? Now, Ivanov's work fit into this perspective because he believed that by breeding humans with apes, it would be possible to change humans in big ways, giving a concrete basis for the hypothetical notions of positive eugenics. And it also had the added bonus of giving more credence to Darwinian ideas, because if humans and apes were as closely related as Darwin believed, they should be able to crossbreed with humans. Except that was all a lie as well, although they did try it, the original Anunnaki. That's where the ideas come from. But they said this could be used as a pro-pagan dart tool by the Soviet government to help its efforts to stamp out religion. Russia was trying to stamp out religion. I wonder why. And they said to replace it with what amounted to worship of the state. But these views fell out of favour, and Stalin found he liked Lamarckian view of evolution much better, and this was the idea that acquired traits were passed on to the next generation. If a person develops big muscles, they will pass on those muscles to their children, it is thought. And it seems Stalin supported the Lamarckian view because the positive eugenics perspective was too close to what the Nazis believed. And since the Bolsheviks and the fascists hated each other, that simply wouldn't do. A bit like how the Nazis wouldn't accept the theory of relativity because a Jew came up with it. Except, unbeknown to this author, the Bolsheviks and the fascists were one and the same group, designed to bring both countries down. And world hegemony meant they, the Jewish elites, had to destroy the two major white race countries, having already conquered Britain, France and Holland with the Rothschilds' money, and linked into the corrupt French houses of Orange, the Merovingians and the Franks, all of which were Jewish elite operated. So those who fell on the positive eugenics side of the spectrum were swept in a purge of the Soviet scientific community in 1930, try 15 years prior. That was the second purge. And this included Ilya Ivanov, who was accused of being a saboteur by a fellow scientist when his artificial insemination equipment malfunctioned. And Ivanov was exiled to Kazakhstan, where he died 2 years later. Now, it was said that Ivanov was certainly nearing mad scientist territory. Nearing? And his unethical actions in Africa and the nature of his work certainly do a lot to make him a modern-day Frankenstein. But the question is whether Ivanov was actually working on direct orders of Stalin to make super soldiers. And it turns out, they say, that that wasn't true. Here comes the cover-up. As if true, it shows of how far they went 110 years ago, that some critical thinking people will hypothesize on the advancements that have been made since. And so they're trying to dismiss it. And the report said Stalin probably didn't even know about Ivanov's work, other than that he might have seen it in the papers. And the bit about the super soldiers came from an article in the New Scotsman, where they cite recently uncovered documents as proof and the source. They say there are no links to any of the sources nor any other attribution. Now, after the New Scotsman article, the notion of ape super soldiers took off when the History Channel showed Monster Quest and did an episode on the topic. And creationist websites also widely circulated the story. It fit well with their worldview, since in their minds the failure to hybridize apes with humans overturns the evolutionary theory, which is a load of bull anyway. And it didn't hurt that it linked Darwin's theory with the sociopathic atheist dictator either. And while the urban legend brought a lot of attention to the case, the real story is about the intersection of ethics, science and politics. And the question wasn't whether Ivanov could have hybridized humans and apes, but whether he should even try. Again, it's all for war purposes. And these sorts of ethical questions are more pertinent today with the advancements in biotechnology that make things possible that Ivanov couldn't have dreamed of. But the point is, that science that was done by Ivanov in the early 1900s was carried on in Montauk on Long Island. So to say it didn't start or continue is pure lies. And this piece is another of the fact checkers' bullshit to rewrite his story again to me. So much time now they spend trying to debunk not theory but facts, as finally the people are awakening to the atrocities and the psychopathic science experiments performed on humans mainly, plus animals as well. And the people are starting to question it. Hence articles like this. Back in 2010 to 2014 in particular, many alt media were talking about chemtrails and their implications, and it was the viral topic of the time. Until I did the It Makes No Sense piece on Cosmic Voice and asked, are the Elites immune to them? Did they wear masks to prevent it? Take anti-chemtrail pills? Or is another race of beings changing the chemical composition of our planet for them to be able to reside here? Was the question I asked. And the reason being is not all beings are oxygen breathers. There are many that are hydrogen or nitrogen breathers. And to me this made more sense. And perhaps it made too much sense to those that listened to that show, as the collective gulp was audible. And perhaps it was the first of many of my common sense pieces that would unfold over the 8+ years of being a radio show host. And with that in mind, and upon pondering on something else related to Offworld, I got to pondering again. Chemtrails, CHEM trails, or is it chemtrails, KHEM trails? Because Kahem means burnt to black. Now Kahem is depicted as a human male wearing a crown with 2 tall ostrich plumes, with the right hand raised behind his head holding a flail, and the left hand hidden, sleight of hand, with a prominent erect phallus. He's supposed to represent the power of generation, or gene of ration, and was considered the god of the harvest and the protector of crops. And his sacred animal was a white bull. Now Kahem is also the native name for Egypt, the original name of Egypt, Kahem. And it means black and referred to the fertile black soil of the Nile Valley, except it doesn't mean that at all. It means the jet black race Lucifer brought here to destroy the white race, and those so-called ancient Egyptians of Ra, Horus, Osiris, Isis, Baal, Apophis, Inanna, Anu, Marduk and other varieties of off-world entities were all part of it. Now, linguistically and ethnologically, Kahem is the equivalent to Ham in the book of Genesis 9 and 10, the youngest son of Noah and the progenitor of the Egyptians, Nubians, and Canaanites. The progenitor. Ham, Shem, and Japheth are all their beings, not ours. Now, Letopolis was an ancient Egyptian city and the capital of the second nome of Lower Egypt. Its Egyptian name was Kehem, and the modern site of its remains is known as Orsim. Now, the city was a centre of worship of the deity Khenti Erti, or Khenti Kehem, and a form of the god Horus. And the site and its deity are mentioned in texts from as far back as the Old Kingdom, circa 2686 to 2181 BC, and a temple to the god probably stood there very early in Egyptian history. But Kehem Trails means burnt to black, and given Gates said he would block out the sun, and chemtrails are trapping the heat and in part creating the increase in temperatures. This begs the question, are or were Kehem Trails meant to bring in the black sun?